Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to the Azerbaijan or Baku post-race reaction. What was your thoughts in this race? Did you enjoy it? Did you think the pit strategy was lacking, or did that one stop make the difference for you on how they were going to handle the overcuts and undercuts for the teams around them? Did you think, Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri battle at the front was going to last as long as it did? Did you think that one of them was going to end up overtaking the other and kind of running away with it? I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought it was a fairly good race with that lead, strategy between Oscar and Charles. I was thinking that Charles was going to actually be able to come back from some kind of mistake and probably run away with it after that first stint that he made on that first tire and had that pretty decent gap between him and Oscar. So I was expecting that to come out and play, but then I wasn't quite expecting actually to have their other teammates come in with Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz coming up back through the grid and putting pressure on them. I was quite not where that was. I was kind of thinking that they actually might have a chance of actually putting pressure on the leaders instead of taking themselves out at the very end. So that kind of gave that little bit extra edge for myself as well. But what was your thoughts? And did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? And kind of give you a little history on how this race played out. Charles kept the lead, and on lap 5 he had a 0.76 second lead, and on lap 10 he was up to a 3.25 second lead. Then Oscar was able to take the lead from Charles Leclerc on lap 20. And on lap 25, Oscar only had a 0.613 second lead. And on lap 35, he had a 0.56 second lead. So Charles Leclerc was right on his tail for most of this race. He did end up winning the race by like 10.1 or something seconds. But that was mainly because of the safety car or virtual safety car involved and the battle that happened between, Sainz and Perez, as well as Perez coming up on Charles Leclerc, kind of dropping that back into that field. So what was your thoughts? Did you enjoy it? Did it really keep you on the edge of your seat for most of the race? Were you waiting for that big crash to come more in the middle of the race instead of the end of the race? How did that play out for you? And as usual, I go through the order from last to first and kind of give you my thoughts on how that driver did and what happened to them if I know. So without further ado, sorry about that. We will start off with Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified in 11th and ended up, quitting on lap 16. He did have contact with Stroll on the very first lap, kind of put a big hole in that RB for him. And so that kind of made his day. He tried to go around for a little while and then just ended up retiring that RB on lap 16. So that pretty much was Yuki's horrible day on this race. And then, of course, Lance Stroll only made it a little bit farther. He made it to lap 47 before he had to call it. He ended up pitting on the very first laps, switch tires because of that contact and that puncture that he got from that contact with Yuki. And then made it to lap 22 on that set of hards and went to another set of hards as he started off in the mediums to meet the requirements, but yet then couldn't maintain that space. So he ended up actually retiring the car near the end of the race on lap 47. So not a great race for him, and he didn't actually qualify up as where his teammate was for Alonso. So I think that kind of hurt him overall. I think he didn't do as well as he needed to in the qualifying session to get him kind of out of the contention in that mid-pack. And so he's trying too hard and kind of got himself into trouble on that first lap. Now, it's kind of hard to figure out whose fault it was between Lance and Yuki that were kind of racing side by side. I didn't get a very good look at it, but it seemed like it was just a racing incident from my view at that time. Now we have Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, who took themselves out through a contact late in the race as well. Carlos actually qualified in third, and made it to 18th. He did start off on a set of mediums and went to lap 17 before switching to a set of hards. I have him passing Lando on lap 23 for 5th, passing Alex Albon on lap 24 for 4th, passing Perez on lap 50 for 3rd, and then basically on that same lap, lap 50, they kind of tangled with Perez and hit the wall and caused that virtual safety car for them. So I know he wasn't his favorite race, and it's probably not going to help with having a wreck at the very end of the race either, even though he was kind of fighting there for that second or third position on the podium. So kind of a bad luck for Carlos in my view. Same thing with kind of Sergio Perez. He had qualified in 4th, ends up in 17th. He did gain a spot at the very beginning of the race, so that was good to see for Sergio Perez. He started off on mediums, went to lap 13 before switching to a set of hards. I have him passing George on the very first lap for 3rd for that one position at the very beginning, and passed Norris on lap 16 for 5th, and then passed Albon on lap 19 for 3rd. This is pretty much a racing incident between Carlos and Perez. I think if anybody's fault, it's probably Perez's fault for not keeping that distance and not realizing that Carlos was drifting over slightly, as Carlos was technically in the lead at that point. I think Perez should have given way on that straightaway. I think Sergio Perez was kind of more concentrating on trying to keep that DRS, from the Charles Leclerc, and so he wasn't really paying attention to Carlos on his right in the front. So he was more concentrated a little farther down the grid to see if he could get that boost to get past Carlos. So in that regard, I think it was Perez's fault. If you could call it anybody's fault, I think it was more of a kind of a racing incident in that front. I think their concentration. And of course, I don't think Carlos was going to be able to really see or tell where Perez was directly from those little tiny mirrors that he had that know he was right there on his side at the back, even though I would guess that's part of that as well. So then maybe that pulls into being more of in that line of fault. So, but anyway, it was just a slight drift, trying to keep in that DRS, that drag area, so they can get pulled forward. And I just kind of happened to try to take the same spot, which caused them both to be dropped down the field to the very last. So that's bad on them and bad on the teams. But overall, I think it's just more of an incident. Decent race for them both before then, so that is the positive you could probably take away. Then you have Valtteri Bottas, who qualified in 16th and ended up in 16th, and I really don't have a whole lot for him. He did go a lap down. He did go to lap 11 before switching to a set of hards from the mediums he started the race on. Doesn't sound like that was the best strategy for them, as his teammate did the opposite and ended up ahead of him in this run. So he wasn't able to gain the ground he needed to at the start of the race on those medium sets, and then just kind of fell back and only got to 16th due to people dropping out of the race. So a pretty poor race for Valtteri, in my view. Not the greatest introduction or resume-driven drive for him to try to keep a seat next year. Esteban Ocon, who has a seat now with Haas, ended up starting the grid on 20th position after changing some stuff around in his car and parked firmly. So he started from the pit lane, started at the back of the grid, and made it up to 15th. I have him actually going really long. He did gain his position at the very start of the race and went to lap 49 on a set of hards. So that was good to see. Esteban Ocon, kind of run that. It just probably wasn't the best strategy for this. I think they were hoping for a safety car or something to hit a little bit before that so they could kind of jump into that field a little bit better. But it didn't kind of turn out before he ended up having to pit. So kind of ran into that back of that pack. Not the best race for him in that Alpine, but I don't think it's necessarily his fault, especially if starting from that back, trying to gain those positions on this track that's fairly known to be fairly tough to pass, except for the DRS straightaways. Juan Yuzo, I think, did a fairly good job, actually. Qualified or started the race in 17th position and made it his way up to 14th. He did qualify in 18th, actually, but got bumped up because of the other people taking parts. I have him basically going to lap 34 in a set of hards before switching to a set of mediums. He did take on multiple power units as well, so he kind of started from the pit lane as well, but was able to get past most of those things and did a fairly good job. He passed Bottas on lap 10 for 17th, passed Yuki on lap 12 for 16th, passed Stroll on lap 47 for 18th. So I think that was when Stroll was actually pulling into the pits to retire the car. So, excuse me, that probably didn't count as much, but still a decent run. Got himself up there in the running, showed a good showing, not quite into the points, but a lot better than he's been doing in that stake F1 car, and that stake still is struggling along, so they have a little ways to go. Hopefully with this new management in place, they can probably get some traction and some development going forward. Daniel Ricciardo started the race in 14th, ended up in 13th. He did a decent job. He did pass Yuki on lap 4 for 13th position. He did go long, so he went to lap 49 on a set of hards before switching. So he went the long stint, and for him, that wasn't the greatest stint. Even though he's still 13th position, I think the RB could have gone a little bit farther up in the grid in this running, but he was just kind of in that backfield with that hard tire, worn out hard tire, that kind of getting passed by those other drivers around him in this. So I think they probably should have gone for a more conservative stint before switching tires instead of the long stint to try to go at the full length to try to gain ground. But that's my view. It's hard to say exactly what would have happened in that running, but he stayed clean, didn't have any contacts that I could tell, did roughly a decent job, probably what was expected of him, just not quite where they needed to be. Pierre Gasly started in 18th position, was disqualified from qualifying, so he had to start at the back of the grid because of the tech issues that they had on that Alpine, but was able to make his way all the way up to 12th, almost into the points, which is good to see. Of course, ahead of his teammate as well, so that's always good, even, and you're battling out your teammate there. He did pass Yuki on lap 4 for 14th, and I have him passing Daniel on lap 16 for 10th. He did gain 3 spots at the very beginning of the race, and he went really long to lap 50 on a set of hards before switching to a set of softs. And then I think he might have gotten a little bit more ground, potentially, with the Haas's in front and whatnot on a set of softs for that last lap. But due to that safety car, he basically had to keep in that line as everybody else. So he wasn't able to really take advantage of that soft tires as they were hoping to, I think. Even though it might have been close, I think they were trying to push to get that extra couple positions to get into that 10th or 9th positions potentially for him. So that didn't quite work out for them in their strategy in this running. Now, Nico Hülkenberg started the race in 12th, ended up in 11th. He did a fairly decent job. I think he made a mistake at the end, getting some debris, and he was thinking he had a puncture, and that kind of wore his warning in his tires, and tried to slow down to try to figure out what was going on, make sure it didn't have to come into the pits to change those tires, which actually cost him a couple of positions in this running, or else he would have been in the points in that run. So I think that hurt him at the very end on that mistake that he made. But overall, I think he did a good job. He went to lap 15 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards. He did lose a spot at the very beginning of the race, but overall, I don't think that hurt him too bad. He passed Yuki on lap 3 for 12th. He swapped positions with Behrman on lap 11 for 11th. He passed Daniel Ricciardo on lap 21 for 12th. He passed Gasly on lap 26 for 11th. And passed Franco on lap 36 for 9th. So he's moving up there into that point range fairly decently. I think that mistake I said where he ran over some debris or something to that effect and thought he had a puncture. Then basically lightened up on his drive before they could actually confirm that tire pressures were okay. That put him back in the clutches of those people around him and made him drop back a little bit farther. So I think that was kind of the rough estimate for him. And that gets us through the bottom half of the field. What happened in the top half? We have Oliver Behrman on his second running in F1 actually getting points, which is always good to see. So he's had points with Ferrari and now with Haas. And I think they said that this was the first time ever that someone's basically had points in two different constructors on their first two races in F1 and getting points. So that is good to see. I know he wasn't happy with his race. I think he was saying that he was kind of conserving tires too much on that first stint, trying to compare it too much with some of the qualifying sessions where the track had kind of worn in fairly good on the race part of it, and so he could have put a little bit more pressure on the people around him instead of conserving. Man, excuse me. But he qualified in 10th and ended up in 10th, gaining that extra point, which is always good to see. He did pass Daniel Ricciardo on lap 22 for 13th and passed Gasly on lap 28 for 12th. He started on the mediums like most of the field and went to lap 14 before switching to a set of hard. So I'm always happy to see Behrman do well, and I think it's really cool to see him actually joining the Haas team and getting points on his first official Haas run. So giving him that confidence in the future. We'll probably see Kevin Magnussen back for Singapore, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But it was nice to see Behrman gaining another point in the F1 driver standings. Lewis Hamilton was not happy with his car at all throughout this whole race. Though he was able to drive it in such a fashion, and he wasn't happy with the way he was driving it, but to get all the way up, get into that 9th position and get some points. I know he started off at the very back because of the power unit elements that he was changed in Parc Fermé, so he had to start from the pit lane. Starting in the 19th position, worked his way all the way up to 9th, gaining points. He did gain 2 positions at the first lap. He started off on a set of mediums, went to lap 12 before switching to a set of hards. I have him passing Esteban Ocon on lap 17 for 16th, passing Daniel Ricciardo on lap 23 for 14th, passing Gasly on lap 30 for 13th, passing Oliver Behrman on lap 41 for 12th. And then he ended up, passing a couple other people I think that I missed, and with the people that getting knocked out, pushed him up into that 9th position. So I know he wasn't happy in that Mercedes, but he did a fairly good job, I think, of coming back from near the back of the field all the way into the point range. Even though it went just a couple of points, it was still good to see that. I think they need to work on figuring out what was going on with that Mercedes and why it was driving the way it had to. Because I'm sure if you're comfortable with driving style, it will help tremendously in your progression throughout the field instead of having to kind of fight the Mercedes in the way he was having to drive that. So good job for him, even though the car wasn't very good for him in this run. Franco Colapinto qualified in 8th, or started off in 8th, I should say, and was able to maintain that 8th position. He did qualify in 9th and got bumped up because of the people getting dropped out for park changes. I think that was Lewis, actually. But did a really good job in his second full run on F1, maintaining that space, being right behind his teammate. In fact, he was ahead of his teammate for quite a bit of the race, having to get, swapping positions in this scenario. So it was always good to see him progress and actually get points, helping Williams out on that front. I have him passing Gasly on lap 20 for 10th, passing Hülkenberg on lap 49, I think, for 10th as well. So getting back up there and then getting pushed up to 8th when Perez and Sainz crashed and dropping back out of that field. So he gained some good points, even though he would have been at the very edge of the points anyway. But it was always good to see him, in that Williams, be able to get some points on a second running, give him that confidence that he needs to proceed forward in that Williams, even though he is not going to be in that Williams next year. So I think that's always good for him to kind of show what he can do. I was kind of questioning Williams in their swap from, Logan Sargent to Franco, in the sense that my thought is that if it was just to save money for crashing the car, I'm not sure if that was going to help bringing a brand new person in that still doesn't know the car and the track as well in that sense. And I didn't think he was going to be able to get into the points as well. So good on Franco to actually put that doubt behind me in the sense that he deserves to be in that seat and have a seat in this running. I just wasn't thinking at the end of the season it was the best move for Williams, but they have proven me wrong, so that is good for them. Alex Albon started off the race in 9th and ended up in 7th. So he made it pretty good. He started off behind his teammate, ended up in front of his teammate. Always interesting to see. He went to lap 31 on a set of hards, so kind of opposite strategy from his teammate before switching to a set of mediums. And there was a question there of whether they kind of got doped into pitting at that time, or if that was their standard pit stop, and I didn't hear anything directly related to that for those people around him with like Lando. But it was a good run. He swapped with Franco on lap 36 for 10th position, and he passed Hulkenberg on 38 for 9th. So they kind of got him into that running, and then gained the 2 positions to be into that 7th positions during the very end when Sainz and Perez crashed. Another good run for Fernando, starting the race in 7th and ended up in 6th. It's been a while since we've seen an Aston Martin get up there into the point range fairly decently, and I think he did a fairly good job here. He did pass Gasly on lap 17th for that 9th position. Didn't have to pass a whole lot, at least I didn't see it on track. He went to lap 11 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards and kind of stayed up in that front runner positions, staying out of trouble, staying in good positions. So good on Fernando for getting decent points for Aston Martin when it's been a little while since they've had a couple of points in that range. So always good to see Fernando up in the front with his wily strategies that he tried to put forward. So Max was unhappy. He was complaining about his tires and his brakes throughout this race. They're still kind of struggling in that Red Bull, it seems, on the second half of the season. He did start the race in 6th and ended up in 5th, so he did gain a position, and he gained that pretty much on the very start of the race. On that front run, he did pass Sainz on lap 1 for that 5th position, and he passed Daniel Ricciardo on lap 14 for 9th. He went to lap 12 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards, and then he was going to switch to a set of softs on lap 49. I think he was trying to go for that fastest lap to limit the point damage between him and Lando at that point, since Lando had gotten around him. But then that was basically taken away from him due to the virtual safety car being deployed. So that limited him from actually exploiting that soft tire and getting that fastest lap. So I think they were trying to do as much as they possibly could to minimize the point damage, but in regards to that, it didn't happen. It would have been interesting, I think, if McLaren and Lando didn't kind of screw up the qualifying session, and Lando would have started the race near the beginning, front of the race pack, instead of being in that mid pack before having to start the race and kind of work his way up through, see what would have happened, see how many points that potentially Lando has forgone due to that. But it still means it's still in the cards potentially of Lando overtaking Max for the Drivers' Championship, even though that's becoming a little harder as each race ticks on. He's still gaining a couple of points, so that's good to see in this run. So Lando Norris started the race in 15th position due to that mishap in that yellow flag coming out in qualifying, which means he couldn't go for his fast lap and got pushed back and knocked out in Q1. So he started in 15th after the engine changes of the drivers that are around him pushed him up to start the race in 15th, making his way up to 14th. So he's kind of lucky in that regard. Was he able to not start from the near the back of the pack, but start in the mid pack, and then with the people, his old friend Carlos and Max crashing out, bumping him up a couple of other spots in this, so they get him a little bit farther into that point range. So that helped him out to some degree. I know he wasn't happy overall, even though it was a decent race for him in this running. He did get the fastest lap to get that extra point on Max. He did pass Yuki on lap 3 for 11th. He passed Behrman on lap 8 for 10th. Passed Max on lap 49 for 6th. And that's when Max was going to come back and try to get the fastest lap after that. He let him by. He did go a long distance. He went to lap 37 on a set of hards before switching to a set of mediums. So he went the long stint in this running, was able to pull it out and get the most points for McLaren that they probably could expect for due to some of the issues that other drivers were having around them in that qualifying mishap. I know they weren't happy with that, but they recovered and minimized the damage significantly, I think, in this run. So that's good for them, even though they had that mistake. Then we have George Russell, who started the race in 5th, ended up in 3rd. He went to lap 12 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards. I have him passing Daniel Ricciardo on lap 16 for 8th and passing Max Verstappen on lap 34 for 6th. I know they were kind of struggling on their tires as well, that medium set and the hard sets in this running. He wasn't expecting to be on the podium, and I know he is really complaining significantly about how the tires are on edges and no one knows how to, engineer their cars to be the best on those tires. He said all the teams, it could be one tire is good, next tire is horrible, and they don't know why in those regards. And so he was really complaining about the tires during his exit interview for this race. And so it was kind of interesting to see him, even though he got on the podium and got the 3rd position, that he was still complaining about the tire makes and how they were playing a huge role in this constructor standings and the driver standings due to the teams not being able to understand. At one point he was saying he didn't think the tire people were even understood how those tires were reacting. So always interesting to see. But a good job for George Russell, getting up to 3rd, getting on that podium, getting the most he could out of that Mercedes, getting that 3rd constructor on that podium for this race, which is always nice to see a variety of manufacturers on the podium. Charles Leclerc started the race in 1st, ended up in 2nd. You'd think it would be horrible in this running, but I think he actually did a really good job. I think it was just kind of issues with some of the things that they do need to look at, like the in-laps and out-laps for his pit stop. They said he lost some significant time on that, and then he kind of got stuck behind Oscar, and he did try most everything he could to put pressure on him to see if Oscar could have that mistake and let him back around. And he wasn't able to really take advantage of that or have the car to really to do the passes that he was needing to, because it was kind of good and wrong stints, I think, where he needed to be to get past that McLaren on this circuit. So I think overall, even though he did lose a position, I think he did a really good job in this. He had a good start. He got off into a good lead. He built that lead up to a 3-point-something second lead by lap 10. Made it all the way to lap 20 before getting past, and didn't even think that he was going to be able to get past. I think he was thinking that if at all, it was going to be a quick pass, and then he would get passed on the DRS straightaways, which then turned out not to be the case. But he did put significant pressure on Oscar, and I think that was always good to see. I know it doesn't feel great for Charles to start the race in first and end up in second, but I think he did everything he could possibly do in regards to that bold move that Oscar did in that run. I think if Charles had the clean air, it would have been easy for him to keep that lead as well. So it was just that by chance, I think, that Oscar was able to really put that bold pass on Charles and get the lead. And then once he had that, it made it very difficult for Charles to regain that lead as well. So Charles Leclerc did an excellent job, I think, during this race, get the most points that he possibly could without that pass. So interesting move in that regard. Put a lot of excitement for this race, putting pressure back on Oscar, on that knife edge to see if he could actually cut back and do anything. Oscar Piastri did absolutely everything he could. He started this race in second, ended up in first. I have him basically passing Albon on lap 18 for second, and then passing Charles Leclerc on lap 20 for first. He did start off in mediums and went to lap 15 before switching to that hard tire. He did get driver of the day, which I totally agree with. I think he deserves it significantly by being brave enough to put the move on Charles when he did, because he came from a long ways back and was able to keep that car going in the right direction and not sliding off, not burning the tires, not locking up the tires, but making it into that when he said he had probably a 50% chance of pulling that off with the brakes holding or not. And I think that was kind of what Charles was thinking, like, wait a minute, he's coming from way back. I'm just going to get out of the way so I'm not involved in the collateral damage and then get around him in that point. So I think overall, I think Charles had the right idea. It was just by chance Oscar was able to actually pull that maneuver off, which was really good skill in regard, but it's just pushing that knife's edge to the limit. And so that was hard to judge if you're being passed in that framework. So great on Oscar, great on Charles, really good move, made it exciting to the end by being on the tail and then letting the other teammates of Carlos Sainz catch up and be able to put pressure on Sergio Perez, who kind of came up as well from the back of Charles Leclerc in that maneuver. I know that passed potentially for both of them on Charles Leclerc during that maneuvering bit, but weren't able to pull that off either. So he did everything I think he could in all this race. I enjoyed this race. It kind of played out a little bit differently than I was expecting to. I was expecting a little bit more chaos earlier on, but I think I was really good. Probably give it a 7, maybe an 8 out of 10 at this point in time. I enjoyed it. I liked the maneuvers. I was thinking at first that Charles was going to pull away, but then when they did the pit stops and Oscar made that maneuver, and I was thinking, okay, is he going to be able to break that DRS? And he wasn't able to break it, so I was thinking Charles is going to come back and pass him, and he never did, and so that made it really interesting in my regard. But what did you think of this race? So, what did this do to the driver standings? Well, we have Franco Colapinto jumping up to 19th over Logan Sargent and Wang Yuzhou, getting 4 points. So he is now in 19th and a point scorer, even though he doesn't have a drive for next season. So that's good to see him putting pressure on the people around him and see if he deserves a full-time position and see what will come up of that as well. Then you have Alexander Albon jumping Kevin Magnussen, Oliver Behrman, Pierre Gasly, and Daniel Ricciardo, and jumping up to that 13th position with 12 points now. Oliver Behrman did gain a point, getting that true lead over his replacement, or the person he was replacing, Kevin Magnussen, but still dropping back to that 16th overall position. Then you have George Russell passing Sergio Perez for that 17th position, being tied with 143 points. Max Verstappen still has the lead with 313, with Lando slowly catching now with 254. So we get some movement in the back, but we'll see if we can get some more movement in the front of the pack with Lando slowly gaining ground on Max to see if that's going to be a end of the season finale or not. And the constructors standing. So we have McLaren jumping Red Bull for that first position, now with 446 points over Red Bull's 438. And somehow I messed up the other points for Red Bull, so I'll have to fix that in the post. And then we have Williams jumping Alpine for 8th position, now have 16 points over Alpine's 13. So get a little bit of movement in the constructors. We'll see if Red Bull can pull back that first position over McLaren, or if Ferrari is going to have a say in that battle as well with just 425 points instead of the 438 that Red Bull is currently at. So what is coming up? Well, we have the Singapore or Marina Bay GP race on September 22nd. So just like a week away. We basically was introduced in 2008. It's going to have 62 laps, as the length is 3.07 miles, and have a total race distance of 190.228 miles. The current lap record holder is Lewis Hamilton from 2023, so just last year, with a 1 minute 35.867 seconds. So we'll see if Lewis can put some more pressure in the Singapore race, or if there is something else that will happen, it will take that lap record away from him. But until then, I will see you in the grid, and I will have to say farewell.